Hello, everyone, and welcome to Slash Film Daily for Wednesday, March 18th, 2020. On today's episode, we're going to talk about the latest film and TV news. This is Slash Film Editor-in-Chief Peter Sciretta. And joining me on today's podcast is Slash Film Senior Writer, Ben Pearson.
Hey, what's going on?
And writer, Chris Evangelista.
Hello, folks.
So we didn't have a podcast yesterday. The news is just like so depressing. It's all coronavirus. It's all, things are getting shut down. Things are not happening. Things are getting delayed. Bad. So we decided to take a day off, and we were going to do a water cooler episode today, but Jacob was unable to make the water cooler episode today, so we're going to do that tomorrow. So we have some news today, and some of it's not coronavirus, so we'll start off with that. We'll start off with the I guess the happy news. Is it happy news? I don't know. It's just not coronavirus news. So I guess it's away from what you're hearing everywhere else. So let's start off
happy by default.
Yes. Let's start off with Vin Diesel, who claims that Steven Spielberg wants him to direct again. Not only wants him to direct again, but it says if he doesn't, it would be a crime of cinema. Chris, tell us about this.
Yeah, so I actually didn't even know that Vin Diesel had directed a movie, but he did back in 1997. It was called Strays, and he directed it, he wrote it, he starred in it, he funded it by working as a telemarketer. That's how he made all the money to make the movie. And he hasn't, he's done a few like shorts, and he directed actually a TV show episode since then, but he hasn't directed a feature film since then. And he did an interview recently where he said he ran into Steven Spielberg recently, and Steven Spielberg, of course, directed Vin Diesel in Saving Private Ryan. And according to Vin Diesel, Steven Spielberg told him, you really need to get behind the camera again and make a movie. And the quote was, let me bring it up so I can have it. I want to get this exact. So he said, quote, "When I wrote the role for you in Saving Private Ryan, I was obviously employing the actor, but I was also secretly championing the director in you, and you have not directed enough. That is a crime of cinema, and you must get back in the directing chair." That is, according to Vin Diesel, what Steven Spielberg said to him. So whether or not that's true or not, I don't know if he used the exact words, but yeah, so there you have it. Vin Diesel, get behind the camera again because Steven Spielberg told you.
Yeah, and Vin Diesel has a quote, too, that like comparing himself to Jon Favreau. Or I guess he was at Sundance with Jon Favreau, right?
Yeah, so when Vin Diesel took Strays to Sundance at the same time, Swingers was there. And Jon Favreau, he didn't direct Swingers, he wrote it, but he was, Doug Liman directed it. But Jon Favreau was at Sundance at the same time, and apparently they became friendly there. And so yeah, Vin Diesel was like, Jon Favreau's out there making The Lion King and all this stuff, and I should be doing that as well. So go for it, Vin. That's what I say.
Chris, I know you love Steven Spielberg. I love Steven Spielberg. He's one of the gods of cinema. If he actually said this to Vin Diesel, do you think like he actually has this belief that Vin Diesel could be like one of the great directors, or do you think he's just like, saying it to say?
I don't know. I don't want to call Mr. Vin Diesel a liar, so I don't know. All I know is if Steven Spielberg came out to me and was like, "You should direct," I would be like, "All right, I guess I will," because you know what you're talking about, Steven Spielberg.
Does this mean that this self-imposed quarantine that we're going to have to watch a film directed by Vin Diesel?
I hope we are. I hope he like goes out there and he makes like a masterpiece and he blows us all away. Like he wins Oscars and stuff. That's what I want to happen.
Well, I wasn't even talking about that.
For a long time, he's been talking about making a trilogy about Hannibal, like crossing the Alps and like this, ancient battle-driven trilogy. I remember him talking about that like at least 10 years ago. I guess he's just maybe this is the Spielberg comment is the kick in the pants he needed to really get him going on that.
I mean, he seems to butt a lot of heads as producer on the Fast and the Furious movies. He is a producer, right?
Yes.
I think, yeah. So I'm wondering, like, director, you have to be kind of a people person. Like, you kind of have to, like, get the team all rallied together in one vision. And I just don't feel like Vin Diesel is that person. But I don't know. Maybe we'll have to go explore Strays, which I've never seen. So maybe we'll talk about that in a future water cooler episode. Another thing that happened this week is they announced the Razzie Awards 2020 award losers, whatever it is. I guess they can't even have an award ceremony this year, right? Kind of sad. Ben,
Yes.
tell us about it.
Yeah, they were planning to have a big ceremony, and a lot of times people will actually show up to accept the awards. I think Halle Berry did it, Sandra Bullock did it, 2 Oscar-winning actresses actually showed up in person to accept their Razzie Awards in various years. But this year, because of the coronavirus, basically they just turned the whole thing into a YouTube video instead and released the winners that way and canceled their red carpet, glamorous Golden Raspberry Awards celebration event. But in any case, Cats from director Tom Hooper was the biggest, I guess, loser of the night. I don't know what you want to say, but they took home 6 Razzies, including Worst Picture of the Year. I think they had Worst Supporting Actor for James Corden, Worst Supporting Actress for Rebel Wilson, Worst Director for Tom Hooper, Worst Screenplay by Tom Hooper and Lee Hall for Cats. And then they also had, they won the award for the Worst Screen Combo, and the winner was any 2 half-feline / half-human hairballs for Cats. So there were, a decent number of terrible movies that came out last year. I feel like the Razzies, as usual, is just sort of, going after the low-hanging fruit here. I would be much more interested in the Razzies if their categories were, if the nominees in a lot of their categories were much more varied, because it would show me that whoever the hell the voting members of the Razzies are actually watched a ton of bad movies over the course of the year instead of just sort of glomming on to the movies with like the worst Rotten Tomatoes score, for example. So, the Razzie's gonna Razzie, I guess, is the motto of this whole thing. There is one thing that I wanted to mention that I'd never heard of, and I don't know if this is a new thing or if I've just never paid much attention to the Razzies before, but they have this thing called the Razzie Redeemer Award that Eddie Murphy won this year, and I think he probably won a Razzie for Norbit or one of those movies during that awful Eddie Murphy stretch. But he won this Redeemer Award for his performance in Dolomite Is My Name. And I thought that was kind of a cool thing that the Razzies do, where like it's actually like a positive thing instead of, trying to dunk on people. It's like, hey, you were a previous Razzie winner, but your star is on the rise. So congratulations to you. So congrats to Eddie Murphy on his Razzie Redeemer Award.
Yeah. Ben's talking mad smack on the Golden Raspberry Award organization, which is apparently composed of, quote, filmmakers and very opinionated film buffs from around the world, unquote. I'm wondering how many people, and I'm also wondering what filmmakers are part of the Razzie or the Golden Raspberry Award organization.
Yeah, I wonder. Yeah, what do they count as a film? Is it like a I don't even know what an example would be. Like a corporate video? Do they count that? Or I don't know. We'll see what happens.
Or TikTok. If you made a TikTok, are you a filmmaker in the Razzie's eyes?
We need to do an expose on who exactly are voting members in this organization. And then, next year we got to take this more seriously, guys. We got to, how like, who is it? Hollywood Reporter publishes like the early ballots from like Academy members. We got to start publishing the early ballots from the Golden Raspberry Award organization people.
Do we, Peter? Do we?
You know what? I don't hate the idea of the the Razzies. Like, I think there could be some fun to be had here. But I agree with you, Ben. Like, it seems like the people voting on these awards have seen like the 5 biggest bad blockbuster movies of the year. Do you know what I mean? Like, it seems like,
yeah,
like, why not get like a good organization of critics that have actually seen like as many films as Chris has seen last year? How many is that, Chris?
2. I saw 2 movies last year. No, I don't know. A lot.
Hundreds.
Yeah, he's seen hundreds. Like, I would actually want to know what were the actual worst that you saw. Like, I feel like that would be an interesting thing. Like,
mean, it's tough. It's like you have to take into consideration because like there are movies
but then you're punching down, right? Like I feel like
there are movies that are made for like almost no money and they're like unwatchable, but it's like, is it really fair to be like, this was the worst thing ever made? It's like, well, yeah, obviously it cost $5,000 to make, but it's tough. But I see what you're saying for sure.
Maybe limit it to films distributed by, I don't know. How do you even consider like a major film company? Like maybe it's one of the studios. I don't know. I don't know how you. I'm trying to fix the Razzies here, Ben. Like, am I nuts?
I mean, the Razzies may be unfixable, Peter, but I feel like you're putting in a valiant effort. So maybe one day you'll get to the bottom of it.
Yeah. Maybe one day. This self quarantine. I'm gonna use my creative efforts to fix the Razzies. Is what's going on. Westworld.
Productive use of your time.
Yeah. Westworld season 3 aired this past weekend and ratings are down. Chris, tell us about it.
Yeah, so the Westworld season 3 premiere had a 57% drop off, or 57% less people watched this premiere compared to the season 2 premiere. And it's not all bad news. It still had the best premiere of any show on HBO this year. It did better than The Outsider. It did better than The Watchmen premiere, but it's still significantly down from season 2. And there could be, a myriad of reasons for that. It was up against the latest of the seemingly endless Democratic primary, so it had that going against it. At the same time, though, season 2 really did seem to alienate a lot of viewers because I thought season 2 started off strong, but I agree that also as it went on, it got really needlessly convoluted and just kind of like lost the narrative. And I feel like a lot of people got turned off of the show and maybe they just weren't itching to come back for season 3.
I'm a person who loves mystery boxes. I love twists and turns if they're done well, but it felt like season 2 was more of like, it felt like homework. Like I had to watch an episode and then search some Reddits online and then listen to some podcasts and to understand what was going on, and it wasn't fun.
Yeah, you need to take notes as you were watching it. Even I was I actually did the weekly reviews last season, and even I was like, who the hell? I kept losing track of what was going on just because it was so convoluted.
Yeah, we'll talk about this season on tomorrow's water cooler. But I would venture to say it's a lot more fun than last season. What would you say in a couple words, Chris?
I've seen the first 4 episodes. I do think it's I don't want to say course correcting, but it is more entertaining than season 2. But I also do think season 3 still has that mystery box problem, which it's not as bad as season 2 yet, but I can feel like it's sort of drifting in that direction, and I really hope it pulls up before it gets that far.
Okay, we've reached the end of the news that is not about the coronavirus. We're about to enter coronavirus zone. Let's start off with how the coronavirus is hurting film crew members, because you're hearing about all these productions shutting down. They're shutting down these productions. What many people don't know is when they shut down these productions, these crew members are not just given a paycheck while the time's off. They're let go. So Ben, tell us about this.
Yeah, a lot of they're called below the line people who work. Basically, their names are not the ones that are flashy and above the title, and they're all the people whose names show up in the credits as you're just sitting through waiting to watch the next Marvel stinger. Basically, a lot of these people work as essentially part-time employees who don't receive benefits or paid sick leave and stuff like that. They're like nomads who jump from one production to the next in order to meet union requirements for the lucky ones who are actually part of unions. It's kind of it's a tough job even in really, really good times. Obviously, the coronavirus has made this not a good time. So this is a pretty disastrous period for anybody who works in film production. The long and short of it is that there aren't any official plans that have been put in place yet to try to help out these people financially. But according to Variety, there's a growing consensus that crew members who are not under long-term contract to a given production will receive at least 2 to 3 weeks of straight-time paychecks which means 40 hours a week. So Disney's TV group may be giving them 3 weeks' pay as a starting point. Warner Brothers is believed to have committed to 2 weeks of full pay for full-time employees. It's unclear if that's going to extend to production crew staffers, because Warner Brothers actually has people who, give tours on the lot and work in restaurants on the lot. So those are the kind of people that are being eyed for this Warner Brothers sort of relief program. Netflix is going to be giving 2 weeks of pay for its crews in the US and Canada on the shows that they produce in-house. So, that sounds like a good starting point for some, but the 40 hours a week thing is really a sticking point for people, because a lot of these crew members are the people who you never really hear about them. They're the people who are there, hours before everybody else. They're there hours after everybody else goes home, because they're the ones who are, laying dolly track and setting up lights and all that kind of stuff that has to happen to get these productions moving. And they're the lifeblood of the industry. They often work something like, 60 to 100 hour work weeks. So these checks that they're talking about for 40 hours are, it's better than nothing, certainly. But, yeah, this is the part of the show where we just talk about depressing things, because there isn't really like a good, nobody knows what's going on. Nobody knows, when productions could theoretically get back up and running again. So there's no real easy way to plan for how to help these people. And they don't know whether the federal government's going to step in and help out, or whether they're not going to be classified as the type of workers who could receive aid, in terms of bailouts and stuff like that. So it's just a really uncertain time for a lot of folks out there right now.
Yeah, it's really tough. And it's gonna get worse. Like yesterday, we heard that almost every single movie theater in the United States is going to be closing. Chris, what do we know?
Yeah, so all week we've been getting updates on this. At first, AMC theaters announced they were reducing capacity by 50%. Then they dropped it down to 50 people total. We also heard that Regal theaters were closing, and now there's an update on all of this where AMC, Alamo Drafthouse, Cinemark, and Landmark theaters are all closing for the foreseeable future. They all have basically the same message that this is supposed to be temporary, and we hope to be back soon, but no one really knows when this is going to end and when these theaters are going to come back and how they're going to come back, because a lot of these theaters don't have money to burn, and they're definitely going to be suffering during this time. So it's a very confusing time for the movies. Like, it's like, I don't know. I don't know where this is going, basically.
Yeah, and there's also, a lot of employees nationwide of these chains that are getting little to no money while these theaters are shut down, suddenly not getting a paycheck. And these are people that are working full time for big corporations. So it's a pretty crazy time. We'll talk about the future of exhibition in just a few seconds, but before we get there, we have been talking about how some of these movies have been put straight to VOD or straight to rental. They're taking some of these theatrical movies and bringing them to the home while everybody is quarantined in their own houses. And Ben, is that going to happen for all movies?
Well, the National Association of Theater Owners saw all of that coverage and basically wants everybody to pump the brakes a little bit. They released a statement, essentially, the most important part of their statement is, I'll just read it here. Although there has been speculation in the media that the temporary closure of theaters will lead to accelerated or exclusive releases of theatrical titles to home streaming, such speculation ignores the underlying financial logic of studio investment in theatrical titles. To avoid catastrophic losses to the studios, these titles must have the fullest possible theatrical release around the world. So that's the gist of their argument. They're basically saying, hey, everybody who's claiming that all of this marks the death of movie theaters forever, that's not necessarily true, because as we saw, even we were talking about this a couple days ago on the podcast, and even since then, Disney has delayed Black Widow. So they could have, if they wanted to, put Black Widow straight on Disney Plus, or made it available for a rental or whatever. But they decided to delay that movie, and I think it's because of the reasons that we were talking about before, the reasons that the National Association of Theater Owners brings up here. essentially Disney spent too much money to make Black Widow for it to be, financially viable for them to just release it on a streaming platform. Even though the world is in an uncertain state right now, they're banking on the fact that theaters are going to exist when all of this is said and done, and that people will, go and see their movies when it's safe to do so, essentially, and that they'll be able to make more money that way than they would, putting it straight to streaming. So, that's the latest there.
It's going to be interesting this Friday when, some of the Universal films are hitting VOD for the first time from theatrical. I believe so. I believe it's this Friday. And it's going to be interesting to see how quickly those films get pirated. Will those films get more downloaded illegally than other previous films if we compare those numbers? Because, those seed numbers are out there. Unfortunately, movie studios don't release... I don't think they've released the digital rental numbers, right? Like, those aren't available anywhere publicly. So I'm not sure we're going to have a good indication of, like, how well, this new way of going, bypassing the theater and going direct to the home is actually going to do. But one thing's for sure, it's not good for the movie theaters that we mentioned previously. All these movie theaters that are shut down, there's only, I think, 20% U.S. theaters remain, and this could lose up to $2 billion at the box office. Chris, tell us about that.
I mean, yeah, you pretty much said it all. At this point, there are only 20% of U.S. theaters remaining, and that is going to be catastrophic for all of these theaters. The industry could lose up to $2 billion as we go on, and that's just an estimate. It could be worse. Yeah. Maybe it'll be better though. Let's be positive. It could be better.
I mean,
I want to pose. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say one of the saddest things here in this piece that I think there was like an analyst or something saying how they can't even imagine that AMC is going to be alive after this. Like that they are going to reopen. And AMC is the biggest movie theater chain in this country. So what is going to happen?
I was actually going to say there's, I wrote about this just very briefly, sort of as an aside in the piece about the National Association of Theater Owners statement. But I sort of speculated, like, maybe if movie theater chains have to close down and, something like AMC or Regal or one of those big chains goes out of business, I wonder if the studios themselves would sort of swoop in and try to purchase those theaters, because I think we talked about this when I wrote about it, but there's this thing called the Paramount Consent Decrees. It's this really old law that basically prevented theaters from owning their own, studios from owning their own theaters. It sort of broke up the monopolies that used to happen in the golden age of Hollywood and all that. It seemed like, late last year, that those decrees were going to be essentially wiped away and all of those rules would no longer apply. So it seems to have paved the way for studios to maybe be able to swoop in and buy up these theaters themselves if they're closed down. And that would maybe be a way for them to ensure that, there would be a place for people to watch things like Black Widow and F9 and all of that stuff that's supposed to be released, next year or later this year or whatever. What do you think about that?
I mean, analysts did estimate that Amazon spent $6 billion on content for Prime Video in last year. So AMC, you could buy a company like AMC, before this whole thing happened for $250 million. It's like a drop in a bucket. Like it's nothing for like a company like Amazon. So I'm wondering, I remember when we were first talking about this, Chris, you were very worried about the prospect of like Amazon and Netflix buying movie theaters, but maybe they're going to be the superhero savior that we need.
I mean, back then I had no idea a pandemic was coming.
I'm not.
I'm just saying, like, who knew that? At the time I was like, this doesn't seem like a great idea, but now that the world is ending, maybe it is a good idea. Who knows? But it's weird though, because then you enter that area where like, is every studio going to own their own movie theater? And where's the I don't want to say accountability, but like they're going to hold all the cards basically if that happened. And it's like, I'm always wary when any company has too much power, and that seems like a lot of power, but I don't know where we're going. So yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. Let's talk about TV for a second here, because almost every single production, TV or film, has shut down. And I remember this kind of thing happened during like the writer's strike back in the day. And like we got a lot of TV shows that ended suddenly or ended abruptly, and didn't really have these endings. What is going to happen, Ben? Like, do we know what is going to happen with TV?
Well, it's unclear still, but a new report at Vulture says that basically all of the major network TV shows are just not going to be able to finish their current seasons. So a lot of the shows that are currently airing right now have already started airing their seasons, still had, anywhere from 1 to 4 episodes left to actually, complete production on. And as you mentioned, everything's been shut down because of the coronavirus. So the new information is that executives at the major broadcast TV networks are now working under the assumption that few, if any, of the dozens of series that halted production in recent days because of the coronavirus pandemic will be returning anytime soon. It now seems almost certain that most series already on the air will end their seasons early, anywhere from 1 to 4 episodes short of their planned full season orders. So essentially the reason for this is, they shut down the productions. Let's say that in a best case scenario, the CDC lifts the restrictions on social distancing and all that kind of stuff within, the next few weeks. At that point, the productions would have to try to ramp back up again. But, in between now and then, actors could have signed new deals, setting up new projects that start filming later on in the hopes that they would, be able to jump from one project into the next right when this thing, finally lifts. You have to get the crews back together, and they also are, theoretically jumping around and looking for other gigs and stuff as well. You have to, hire production assistants and pay for office space and rentals and catering companies and all that stuff. There's like huge costs associated with shutting down a show and then starting it back up again. And it's just so uncertain that it seems very, very unlikely that a lot of the shows that are airing right now are going to be able to finish out their season. So some shows have already finished production, like Modern Family, I think, is one they mentioned, and something called Carol's Second Act. So all the big Carol's Second Act fans out there, they wrapped production weeks ago, so their full seasons will air as planned. But for a lot of things, it's probably just seasons are just gonna end with maybe in a more cliffhangery fashion than they would have wanted, or just more abruptly than they would have wanted. I guess one note here is that this mostly applies to broadcast shows, because a lot of cable and streaming shows end up wrapping production before their first episodes actually air. And then obviously something like Netflix airs all of them at once. So it's unlikely that there will be, shortened seasons for shows on, cable and streaming networks. But it still could happen as well. And then the other thing is that they're looking at a lot of delays for upcoming shows. They think that a lot of productions are going to follow in the footsteps of Fargo, of what FX did with Fargo, which was just a couple days ago, delayed the release of its 4th season. So they don't want to, start something that they can't finish, basically. So they're just going to sort of hold off and see how this whole thing plays out, and maybe be able to time it out and game it out a little bit differently in the coming weeks.
Yeah, and what you mentioned is also relevant for movies as well, like film productions that have shut down, like Uncharted, like, with Tom Holland. They were rushing that. The reason why they changed directors so many times within a short period of time to get that into production is because they needed to go into production before Spider-Man. Spider-Man was the hard out that Tom Holland needed, and they needed to film this and get it done before then. And now I assume once they go back into production, that time for Tom Holland's not going to be there. So it's going to be interesting. I don't think we mentioned on a previous podcast, but the Avatar sequels have also shut down production in New Zealand. So there's a chance that Avatar 2 will get delayed yet again. That would probably be like the 6th delay in that film's history. And I do want to jokingly brag here that I was the one on our upcoming movies of the year, when we were most anticipated movies of the year, I was trying to push for the Doug Liman film, which ended up not being on the release slate for this year, ended up on next year's release slate, and you guys all made fun of me, and you were like, you were right, and rightfully so. You guys were right. I shouldn't have argued for a film that didn't have a release date for this year, but I want to gloat and say that you guys were all wrong, because most of the films that you picked that had release dates for this year are not going to come out this year. So there.
Yes, we're all winners now.
Yeah. We have a big list on the site. Brad is putting it together of all the Hollywood coronavirus cancellations, film, TV, entertainment events impacted by this pandemic. So if you want to see a list of everything, it's put together in like one long article. You can see it there. You can find more of all of our work at slashfilm.com. You can find this podcast Slashfilm Daily, published every weekday on iTunes, Google, Overcast, Spotify, all the popular podcast apps. Please feel free to send your feedback, questions, comments, concerns to us at peter@slashfilm.com, and rate and review this podcast on iTunes. Tell your friends, spread the word, and we'll see you tomorrow.
Shut down will be shut down, so then we can move on and talk about other stuff.
Yeah, but like, what is it going to be? Like, it's going to be. Yeah.
I mean, there's still, well, I guess they're still streaming for now until everything that's already been made is out, and then there's nothing. I don't know. I'm very anxious about all of this, because I'm worried. It's like, if there's no entertainment, what are we going to do? And hopefully it doesn't get that point. But of course, if it does get to that point, I feel like work is the least part of our problem.
Yeah,
we'll be like
sure.
fighting on the landscape against Mad Max warriors by then. So,
but it's like,
I think there's enough stuff banked where hopefully we'll be okay. But
I was gonna say, even during the writer's strike, there was like, reality television saw a huge boom during that, because of that, like, there was no quote unquote writers for that, or maybe they weren't Writers Guild of Association. So like now there's just gonna be this like huge gap in content for us to like not cover. It's gonna be. But
the thing is, like, we could basically, if we wanted to, we could just turn the podcast into like every day as like a mini version of the water cooler, because this could be, we've been talking for years about how there's too much content and there's never been enough time to watch everything. Now is the perfect time for people to just go back and watch stuff that we've been wanting to see and just haven't been able to make time for. So at least we could just talk about content that already exists. We're never going to run out of that. So we can always talk about something.
Yeah, I've definitely been watching more things while I'm stuck in my house. So maybe that is an option in between our news episodes. We'll have to see. It'll be interesting for sure.